They say the weight of a secret can kill a man. But my father? He carried a secret worth over $5 billion for 35 years, and he did it all just to see if I would grow up with a heart made of gold or a soul made of greed. I was 6 months pregnant, standing in the mud of a cemetery, watching the only man who ever loved me being lowered into the ground. My father, James Thompson, died a janitor, with the smell of pine cleaner clinging to his skin. And 72 hours later, while the dirt on his grave was still fresh, my husband stood in a courthouse and signed a marriage license to his mistress. He thought he was trading a penniless pregnant wife for a high-powered marketing manager in a red designer dress. He didn't know that the worn Nike shoebox under my father's bed held the key to a vault and a name that would make the entire city tremble. Tonight, on Elena's Love Lounge, we journey through the darkest night of Tina Thompson's soul. A story of a betrayal so visceral, it will make your blood boil, and a vindication so powerful, it will leave you in tears. If you've ever been underestimated or discarded by someone you trusted, this story is your sanctuary. Before we begin, please subscribe and like this video. Join our lounge of survivors. Let the universe know you are never as powerless as they think you are. The hospital room felt like a tomb before the body was even cold. The air was a suffocating blend of harsh disinfectant, burnt coffee from the vending machine, and the metallic tang of impending death. I had been sitting in the same blue plastic chair for 18 hours, the hard edges digging into my back, a constant reminder of the physical world while my soul felt like it was drifting into the grey. My father, James Thompson, lay beneath the stark white hospital sheets. To the nurses, he was just the janitor from the elementary school. To the doctors, he was stage 4 pancreatic, bed 4B. To me, he was the man who had rider-doubled his shifts so I could have ballet slippers. He was the man whose hands were permanently stained with the work of cleaning up other people's messes, yet those same hands had held mine with the gentleness of a saint every time I cried. "Tina," he whispered. The sound was like sandpaper on silk. I leaned in, my 6-month pregnant belly pressing against the railing of the bed. My daughter kicked a sharp, insistent jab, as if she knew her grandfather was slipping away. "I'm here, Daddy. I'm right here," I sobbed, my tears hot and blurring, the sight of his sunken cheeks. Don't let the fire go out, baby girl," he gasped. His eyes, usually so bright with a secret humour, were clouded now. In the closet, old Nike box, false bottom, the key, box 1247, First National. "Daddy, don't talk about boxes. Talk about coming home," I begged. He let out a weak, rattling chuckle. "I'm going home, Tina. To your mama. But you are a Patson. Remember that. You were never alone. You were never poor. You are never powerless." Before I could ask him what a Patson was, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from Ronald. I looked at it through the salt of my tears. "Still at the hospital? Tom's presentation got moved. Staying at his place to prep. Don't wait up. Order a pizza if you're hungry." A pizza. My father was taking his final breaths, and my husband was suggesting I order a pizza while he prepped with his boss, Yvonne. I looked back at my father. He was watching me. Even in his final moments, his mind was a steel trap. "I see it in his eyes, Tina," he whispered, his grip on my hand suddenly tightening with a strength that terrified me. "He looks at you like a burden, like a bill he doesn't want to pay. Trust the plan, baby girl. Trust the plan." Then, the monitor flatlined. The sound drilled into my skull. I collapsed onto his chest, breathing in the fading scent of Irish spring soap and the faint, earthy smell of the school hallways. I screamed until my throat was raw, but the only response was the mechanical hiss of the ventilator and the cold silence of a man who had taken his secrets to the grave. I didn't know then that Ronald wasn't at Tom's. He was at a jewelry store, picking out a diamond for the woman who would celebrate my father's death as the grand opening of her new life. The rain at Evergreen Cemetery didn't feel like water. It felt like lead. It hammered down on my black umbrella, the rhythmic thud, 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 matching the pounding of the blood in my ears. I stood at the edge of the open grave, clutching my father's worn work jacket around my shoulders. It still smelled like him: effort, pine needles, and the faint sweetness of the tobacco he used to smoke on the porch. Ronald stood beside me, but the distance between us was wider than the grave itself. He held his own umbrella, careful not to let a single drop of rain ruin his tailored suit. He didn't offer me his arm. He didn't touch my belly. He just kept checking his watch, his jaw set in a line of visible irritation. "Tina, we need to wrap this up." He leaned in and whispered, as the preacher spoke of dust to dust. "I have a lunch meeting at 1. Yvonne says it's crucial for the Q4 projections." I looked at him, and for a second, the grief was eclipsed by a blinding, white-hot flash of anger. "Ronald, we are burying my father, the man who helped us with our down payment. The man who fixed our sink 3 weeks ago while he was coughing up blood. Can the projections wait for the casket to hit the dirt?" He rolled his eyes, a small, sharp movement that felt like a slap. "Don't be dramatic, Tina. It's the pregnancy hormones. I'll see you at home. Take a cab." He walked away before the final prayer was even finished. I watched his polished shoes navigate the mud, careful and calculated. He didn't look back. Not once. Mrs. Chen, the elderly secretary from the school, came up and hugged me. She smelled like mothballs and kindness. "Your daddy was a king in a janitor's uniform, Tina," she whispered. "He told me something last month. He said, 'Helen, the storm is coming for my girl.' But I built her a lighthouse. I didn't know what he meant then. But looking at that husband of yours, I think I'm starting to see the clouds." I took a cab back to our apartment, my mind a whirlwind of my father's dying words. "Patson, box 1247. I sat on the edge of our bed, exhausted, and opened Instagram. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the intuition of a woman who was already losing everything. There it was, a post from Yvonne Chen. She was in a red designer dress that cost more than my car. She was sitting in a candlelit booth at the Obsidian, the most expensive steakhouse in the city. And there, sitting across from her, his hand over hers, was Ronald. The caption: "When one door closes, a golden one opens. Celebrating new beginnings with my favorite person. Number, engagement. Number, new life. Number, no looking back." The timestamp was 2 hours ago. While I was throwing a yellow rose onto my father's coffin, my husband was sliding a ring onto the finger of the woman who had called my father a smelly old man at our wedding. The room began to spin. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I looked at the divorce papers Ronald had left on the kitchen table. The ones he'd claimed were just for tax purposes a week ago, and I realized the tax he was avoiding was me. I was the old life. Yvonne was the new beginning. I picked up my father's jacket, reached into the pocket, and felt the cold, hard metal of a small brass key. The janitor was gone, but the lighthouse was about to turn on. The apartment felt different now. It was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that had been a beautiful, carefully constructed lie. I knelt on the floor of my father's bedroom closet, the scent of cedar and mothballs swirling around me. My knees ached against the hard floor, but I didn't care. I reached for the old Nike shoebox, its edges frayed and grey with time. To anyone else, it was trash. To my father, it was a sanctuary. I ran my fingers along the bottom of the box. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, thud thud, thud thud, as I felt the slight unevenness of the cardboard. With a sharp tug, the false bottom gave way. There, nestled in a piece of red velvet that looked like it had been cut from an old theatre curtain, was a heavy brass key. It felt unnaturally cold, its weight far greater than its size suggested. I didn't wait for the sun to come up. I drove to First National Bank, my father's work jacket still draped over my shoulders like a suit of armour. The bank was an imposing structure of marble and glass, a cathedral built for the worship of currency. As I walked across the lobby, my heels echoing like gunshots against the stone, I felt smaller than I ever had. I looked like a girl who had lost everything. My eyes were swollen. My hair was a mess from the cemetery rain, and my pregnancy was a visible sign of my vulnerability. I need to access safety deposit box 1247, I told the clerk, my voice trembling. The woman behind the counter glanced at my disheveled appearance, her eyes full of the practiced pity people give to the unlucky. She typed into her computer, then paused. Her entire posture shifted. She didn't look at me with pity anymore. She looked at me with fear. "One moment, Miss Thompson. I need to get the branch manager." Daniel Whitmore didn't walk out. He practically glided. He was a man in an Italian suit that cost more than my father's apartment. Yet he bowed to me, as if I were royalty. He led me through a series of heavy security doors into a private room that smelled of expensive leather and ozone. "Your father was a very particular man, Tina," Whitmore said, his voice a hushed whisper, as he used 2 keys to slide the long metal box onto the table. "He often said that true power is the kind that doesn't need to shout. He's been preparing for this day for 20 years. He left me alone. My hand shook so violently I could barely lift the lid. Inside was a thick, cream-coloured envelope. I tore it open, and the world I knew simply ceased to exist. The documents were a dizzying blur of black ink and golden seals. Stock certificates in Patson Industrial, deeds to skyscrapers in London, controlling shares in pharmaceutical giants. And then, the bank statement. I counted the zeros until my vision blurred. $5.2 billion? James Thompson was the name he chose when he walked away from the Patson dynasty. James Patson III was the name the world had lost. I found the letter at the bottom. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's strong, slanted, and full of love. "Is greater than, my dearest Tina, if you are reading this, the world has become very dark for you. I know about Ronald. I saw the way he looked at you when he thought I wasn't watching, like you were a burden he was waiting to drop. I knew he would leave you when I died. I knew he would go to the woman who glitters. But baby girl, he didn't leave because you weren't enough. He left because he wasn't enough to handle the daughter of James Patson III. I walked away from the family name to raise you with a heart, but I never walked away from the wealth. I grew it for you. I protected it for you. Today, you are the wealthiest woman in this state. Don't seek revenge, Tina. Just become so magnificent that his very existence feels like a footnote in your empire. Trust the plan. I love you more than all the billions in the world, Daddy." I collapsed into the leather chair, a sob laugh tearing through my throat. Ronald had divorced me because he thought I was poor. He had married Yvonne because he thought she was ambitious. He had walked away from a literal queen to chase a woman who was just a common thief of hearts. I returned to the apartment 3 hours later. The janitor's daughter had walked into that bank, but the Patson heir had walked out. I felt a strange, icy calm settling in my marrow. The grief was still there, a heavy, leaden weight, but it was no longer crushing me. It was grounding me. The door to the apartment was open. The smell hit me before I saw him. A cloying, expensive cologne that didn't belong in this space. It was the scent of Ronald trying too hard. He was in the living room, tossing his clothes into a designer suitcase. He looked up when I walked in, his face hardening into that mask of practiced indifference. He didn't see the envelope in my bag. He didn't see the steel in my eyes. He only saw a 6-month pregnant woman in a dead man's jacket. "I left the papers on the table, Tina," he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "I've already moved most of my things to Yvonne's penthouse. You can keep the furniture. It's not really my style anymore." "Your style?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "And what is your style now, Ronald? Betrayal? Adultery? Or just being a coward?" He slammed the suitcase shut, the sound echoing in the hollow room. "Don't start. I told you. I'm not a monster. I'll pay for the baby's essentials. But Yvonne is a senior director. She has a life that requires a certain caliber of partner. You were never going to be that, Tina. You're content with ramen and old movies. I want the world." My phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Yvonne had posted again. It was a photo of her hand. The diamond was massive, gaudy, and desperate. The caption read, "Finally moving into the penthouse with my king. Goodbye to the past. Hello to the billion-dollar future. Number power couple. Number level up." I almost felt a pang of pity for her. She thought Ronald was her level up. She thought she was the one winning. "Sign the papers, Tina," Ronald said, grabbing his keys. "Let's not make this ugly. You're already orphaned and alone. Don't make yourself a bitter ex-wife on top of it." "I'm not alone, Ronald," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I walked to the table and picked up the pen. I signed every page without a single tear, and I'm certainly not bitter. In fact, I think I should thank you. He paused at the door, a look of genuine confusion flickering in his eyes. "Thank me? For what?" "For leaving," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "My father always said that when the trash takes itself out, you don't complain about the smell. You just enjoy the clean house." His face flushed a deep, angry red. "You'll be singing a different tune when the rent is due, and your janitor daddy isn't here to bail you out. Good luck, Tina. You're going to need it." He slammed the door. The sound vibrated through my father's jacket. I stood in the silence of the apartment, the weight of the $5.2 billion key in my pocket. Ronald thought he was leaving poverty behind. He thought he was walking into a life of luxury. He had no idea that tomorrow I would be meeting with Harold Ashford at the Sterling Tower. He had no idea that the janitor he looked down on was the man who owned the very building Ronald was hoping to work in. I touched my belly. "Trust the plan," I whispered. The dark night of the soul was over. The morning of the Patson Empire was about to break, and the scream Ronald was going to let out in that parking garage, I was going to make sure it echoed for a lifetime. The Sterling Tower was a monolith of glass and chrome that seemed to pierce the very clouds of Manhattan. In my previous life, I had walked past this building 1,000 times, looking up at the glittering windows and wondering what kind of people breathed the air at the top. I never imagined that the air up there belonged to me. I stepped out of the elevator, and the world changed. The floor was white marble, polished so bright it looked like frozen water. The walls were lined with oil paintings, portraits of stern men with high foreheads and women with pearls. The Patsons, my ancestors, my blood. The receptionist, a woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, started to give me the "you're in the wrong place" look. I was still wearing my father's old, slightly frayed work jacket over my black dress. I looked like a smudge on a diamond. But before she could speak, a man in his 60s, distinguished, with a silver beard and eyes that crinkled just like my father's, stepped into the lobby. "Tina," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that caught me off guard. "I'm Harold Ashford, your Uncle Harry, your father. He was my favorite person in this world." He led me into a conference room that felt like it was floating over the city. Waiting for me were two others, Patricia Whitmore, a woman with a sharp bob and even sharper eyes, and David Chen, a man who looked like he could calculate the weight of the world in his head. "We've been managing your father's accounts for 15 years in the dark," Patricia said, sliding a leather-bound folder toward me. "James. Uncle James was a genius. He didn't just sit on the inheritance. He played the market like a symphony. You own controlling interests in 17 of the largest tech and pharmaceutical companies in the world, Tina. You own the very building we are standing in." But then Harold's face darkened. He reached across the table and took my hand. "There's something you need to know about Ronald. Your father. He didn't just guess that Ronald would leave you." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The day after your father was admitted to the hospital, Ronald came to see him. You were home sleeping," Harold said quietly. "Ronald didn't come to say goodbye. He spent 15 minutes complaining about the cost of the hospital bills. He told your father that your pregnancy was bad timing and a financial drain. He even asked if your father had a secret life insurance policy, so Ronald wouldn't be stuck with the burden of your daddy's death." I felt the air leave my lungs. A sharp, cold pain radiated through my chest. While my father was fighting for his life, my husband was measuring the cost of his casket. "Your father heard every word," Harold continued. "That was the day he called me. He told me, 'Harry, my son-in-law is a scavenger. He thinks he's marrying into poverty. Let him think it. I want him to walk away of his own free will, so he can never, ever claim a piece of my daughter's future. That's why the trust is bulletproof, Tina. Ronald chose the mistress and the paycheck over you. He walked right into the trap your father set." I looked out the window at the tiny cars below, feeling the steel in my spine finally harden. Ronald didn't leave because I wasn't enough. He left because he wasn't enough to handle the truth of who I am. I spent the next 2 weeks in a trance of power. I moved into a quiet, high-security penthouse, not the gaudy one Ronald and Yvonne were bragging about on Instagram, but one that smelled of old wood and fresh lilies. I spent my days with Patricia and David, learning the language of billions. But I wasn't interested in buying yachts or private islands. I want to start a foundation, I told Harold one evening. The Thompson Foundation, for women who are left behind. For the burdens. I want to provide legal fees, rent, and childcare for single mothers who feel like they've lost their footing. Your father already had the paperwork ready. Harold smiled, his eyes twinkling. He seeded it with $500 million. He just needed your signature to activate it. But I had one more condition. A bit of the Patson magnificence my father spoke of. We need a board of directors, I said, tapping my pen against a list of the city's top marketing firms. And I know just the person to handle the branding. Yvonne Chen, Ronald's new wife. Harold let out a bark of laughter. You want to hire the woman who stole your husband? I want her to see me, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I want them both to walk into the Metropolitan Club for the launch dinner, thinking they're about to climb the social ladder. I want them to dress in their best clothes, practice their best smiles, and prepare to impress the mysterious billionaire who founded the Thompson Foundation. The invitations were sent out 3 days later. They were works of art, gold leaf lettering on heavy cream paper. Yvonne's reaction was exactly what I predicted. I watched through a burner account on Instagram as she posted a photo of the invitation. So honored to be invited to the most exclusive charity event of the year. The Thompson name is legendary. This is the level Ronald and I belong at. Number high society. Number the good life. Ronald was in the background of the photo, wearing a new watch, likely bought with the new beginnings money he thought he'd secured by divorcing me. He looked smug. He looked satisfied. I spent the night before the dinner in my father's old work jacket, sitting on my balcony overlooking the park. I touched my belly, feeling my daughter's steady, rhythmic kicks. Your grandpa was a genius, sweetie, I whispered. He knew that people like Ronald and Yvonne don't need to be destroyed by us. They just need enough rope to hang themselves with their own greed. They're going to walk into that room tomorrow thinking they've finally arrived. They have no idea they're walking into their own funeral. I picked up the emerald green gown I'd chosen for the night. The colour of growth, the colour of envy, the colour of the life Ronald thought I'd never have. Tomorrow, the janitor's daughter would be dead, and Tina Thompson would finally take her throne. The Metropolitan Club was a fortress of old-world elegance, a place where the walls were lined with velvet, and the air itself felt heavy with the scent of history and unearned privilege. As the clock struck 7 on that Friday evening, the grand ballroom was illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers, their light refracting into 1,000,000 dancing diamonds against the gilded ceiling. This was the world my father had walked away from, the world of James Patson III. And tonight, it was the stage for the most expensive execution in Manhattan history. Outside, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Ronald stepped out, looking stiff and slightly out of place in a tuxedo that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Yvonne followed him, her movements exaggerated, her head held high as she surveyed the red carpet. She was wearing a floor-length crimson gown, a bold, loud choice that screamed for attention in a room that preferred to whisper. "Do you see the cars, Ronald?" Yvonne hissed, her eyes darting greedily toward the Rolls-Royces and Bentleys lined up along the street. "This is it. The Patson Foundation is the gatekeeper. If we get in tonight, we aren't just marketing directors and sales reps anymore. We're part of the legacy." Ronald adjusted his tie, his jaw tight. "I still don't get why they invited us. We're mid-level. Yvonne, this is something else." "It's because I'm brilliant," she smirked, checking her reflection in the car window. "They saw my portfolio. They know I can take this foundation to the top. Now, stop looking like you're waiting for a bus, and look like you own the room." Inside, the lobby was a sea of pearls and low, rhythmic conversation. Ronald felt a bead of sweat roll down his neck. He kept thinking about Tina, about the cramped apartment, the smell of cheap coffee. and the way she'd looked at him when he'd handed her the divorce papers. He told himself he was doing her a favor. He was setting her free from a life she wasn't built for. But in this room, surrounded by people who had never known the word budget, he felt a strange, hollow pang of guilt. High above the ballroom, in a private suite, I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. Patricia and a team of stylists had spent 3 hours on my transformation. I was draped in an emerald green maternity gown the color of a deep, ancient forest. It was a silhouette of pure power, the silk flowing over my 7-month bump like water. Around my neck was the Patson diamond, a stone that hadn't seen the light of day in 30 years. "You look like your mother," Harold said, standing in the doorway. He was holding a glass of scotch, his eyes misty as he looked at me. She had that same look before a gala, like she knew a secret the rest of the world was dying to hear. I touched the emerald at my throat. It was cold, but my heart was burning. "I'm not here to be my mother, Harold. I'm here to be James Thompson's daughter, the girl whose father mopped floors so she wouldn't have to sweep up the pieces of her own heart." "Are you ready?" he asked. I looked at my reflection, the sharp, clear eyes, the steel in my spine, the calm certainty that only comes after you've lost everything and found yourself. "Ronald thinks I'm a burden," I whispered. "Yvonne thinks I'm a tragedy. Tonight, I show them that I am the storm." The ballroom was packed with 500 of the most influential people in the city. Yvonne was in the center of a circle of minor socialites, her voice high and animated, as she bragged about her vision for the foundation. Ronald stood behind her, sipping champagne he clearly didn't enjoy, his eyes scanning the room for the mysterious director everyone was whispering about. "I hear she's a recluse," Yvonne told a woman in Chanel, "a billionaire heir who's been living undercover. Can you imagine the drama?" "Oh." Suddenly, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the grand staircase. Harold Ashford stepped to the microphone, his voice resonating through the hall with the weight of a century of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the birth of the Thompson-Patson Foundation. This organization was founded on a simple principle, that character matters more than cash. It was built to protect the unprotected, to empower the underestimated, and to remind the world that true wealth is measured in love and integrity." Ronald set his glass down on a waiter's tray. He felt a chill crawl up his spine, a sense of déjà vu, so thick it made his breath catch. "Tonight," Harold continued, "it is my greatest honor to introduce the woman who will lead this legacy, the daughter of my late uncle, James Patson III. Please welcome Miss Tina Thompson-Patson." I stepped into the light. The room went into a vacuum of silence. I walked down the staircase slowly, my hand resting on my belly, my eyes locked onto the 2 figures standing near the buffet table. I watched the color drain from Ronald's face in real time. I watched his jaw drop, his eyes bulging as if he was seeing a ghost. Beside him, Yvonne's triumphant smile didn't just fade, it cracked and shattered like cheap glass. I reached the podium. I didn't look at the cameras. I didn't look at the billionaires. I looked at the man who had divorced me 24 hours after my father's heart stopped. 3 months ago, I said, my voice steady, amplified by the speakers, until it shook the very foundations of the club. I stood in a hospital room and watched a janitor take his last breath. That man mopped floors for 35 years. He drove a car, held together by duct tape. He ate ramen so I could have ballet lessons. He taught me that I was never alone, never poor, and never powerless. I saw Ronald grip the edge of a table, his knuckles turning a ghostly white. I believed him, I continued, my gaze narrowing. But others didn't. Others saw his work shirt and thought he was nothing. They saw my pregnancy and thought I was a burden. When my father's grave dirt was still fresh on my hands, the man I called my husband stood in a courthouse and signed a marriage license to someone else. He left me because he thought I had no money. He left me because he thought he was trading up for a better life. Yvonne was trembling so hard her pearls were rattling. A few people in the front row turned to look at them, the recognition of their faces from the Instagram scandals starting to click. He walked away from a janitor's daughter, I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips. But he had no idea he was walking away from the Patson empire. He didn't know that my father was James Patson III, a man who walked away from billions to prove that love is the only thing worth keeping. My father knew Ronald would leave. He saw it in his eyes months ago. And he thanked God for it, because my father knew that when the trash takes itself out, the house finally stays clean. I raised my glass of sparkling cider to my father, the janitor who was secretly a king. And to everyone here tonight, may you always know your worth before someone else tries to tell you what it is. The room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation, but through the noise, I watched Ronald and Yvonne. They didn't applaud. They didn't move. They stood frozen in the amber of their own greed, the realization of what they had lost, settling into their bones like lead. Yvonne grabbed Ronald's arm, her face a mask of pure, raw horror. She didn't wait for the dinner. She turned and fled toward the exit, dragging a stumbling, broken Ronald behind her. I watched them go, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt the baby kick, not with fear, but with life. My father was right. The plan was perfect. And the best part? The night was only just beginning. The descent from the Metropolitan Club was a journey from heaven to a very specific, hollow kind of hell. Ronald and Yvonne didn't walk. They fled, stumbling through the service exits, their breath coming in ragged, panicked hitches. The air in the parking garage was thick with the smell of damp concrete and old exhaust, a stark contrast to the lilies, an expensive scotch upstairs. Yvonne reached their car, a leased silver sedan she'd insisted they get to match their new status, and leaned against the hood, her chest heaving. The crimson silk of her dress, which had looked so triumphant an hour ago, now looked like a bloodstain against the grey concrete. She turned to Ronald, her eyes wide, wild, and bloodshot. "You said she was poor," Yvonne whispered, the words trembling on her lips before they turned into a snarl. "You said her father was a nobody, a janitor, a man who mopped up vomit for a living." Ronald stood 3 feet away, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He looked like a man who'd been struck by lightning and was waiting for his heart to realize it had stopped. "He was," Ronald stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "I saw him, Yvonne. I saw the blue coveralls. I saw the duct tape on his shoes. I went to the apartment. It was a dump. How was I supposed to know? How were you supposed to know?" Yvonne's voice rose, hitting a pitch that made the car alarms in the distance seem to chirp in response. "You lived with her for years. You slept in her bed while she was pregnant with your child, and you didn't notice that her father was a Patson. Ronald, you didn't just walk away from a wife. You walked away from a billion-dollar empire. You divorced a billionaire for a 6-figure marketing job. And me." The realization hit Ronald then, a physical weight that made him sink onto the concrete floor. He remembered the hospital room. He remembered the way James Thompson had looked at him, those sharp, knowing eyes. He remembered asking about life insurance. He realized now that James hadn't been looking at him with weakness. He'd been looking at him with the cold, calculated pity of a man who was watching a scavenger walk into a trap. "She signed the papers," Ronald whispered to the floor. "She signed them so fast. She didn't even fight." "Of course she didn't fight," Yvonne shrieked, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. The scream echoed off the concrete walls, raw, primal, and full of the kind of horror only greed can produce. "She didn't fight because she was taking out the trash. She let you go because you were worth less than the dirt on her father's mop. And now, look at us. Do you think I can stay with you now? Every time I look at your face, I'm going to see $5 billion that I'll never touch." She reached for her hand, yanking the diamond ring off her finger. It had felt so heavy and significant this morning. Now it looked like a piece of cheap glass. She threw it at Ronald's chest. It bounced off his tuxedo and skittered across the floor, lost in the shadows under a nearby SUV. "I'm the other woman in a story where the wife is a Patson," Yvonne sobbed, her voice breaking. "My reputation is dead. The board will never have me. Nobody will hire me. I thought I was trading up, Ronald, but I was just the fool who helped you throw away a kingdom." She got into the car, the engine roaring to life with a violent, metallic growl. She didn't wait for him. She reversed out of the spot, the tires screeching and leaving black streaks on the floor, leaving Ronald alone in the dim light of the garage. He sat there, a man in a rented tuxedo, surrounded by the echoes of a woman's screams and the terrifying silence of his own choices. He had reached for the gold, only to find his hands were full of ash. 5 years later, the morning sun over the James Thompson Elementary School was soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory in the making. I stood by the gate, my hand tucked into the pocket of my father's old work jacket, which I'd had relined with the finest silk, a secret luxury only I knew about. A small girl with dark curls and eyes that sparkled with her grandfather's mischief skip-jumped toward the entrance, Naomi James Thompson Patson. She was 5 years old, brilliant, and entirely unaware that her college fund was larger than the GDP of a small country. To her, the school was just a place of magic, and the man in the bronze statue near the entrance was just Grandpa James. I'd spent the last 5 years building the foundation. We had saved 6,000 women from the same dark night I had endured. We had built housing, funded legal battles, and reminded the burdens of the world that they were, in fact, the pillars. "Naomi, wait for me," a voice called out from the sidewalk. I turned and saw Ronald. He was standing near his battered sedan, holding a pink backpack. He was allowed supervised visits every other weekend. He looked ordinary now. The arrogance had been replaced by a quiet, permanent weariness. He worked a mid-level sales job in the suburbs, far from the skyscrapers of Manhattan. He never married Yvonne. She had moved to a different state, her name forever synonymous with the Metropolitan Club scandal. Ronald walked up to the gate, his eyes meeting mine. He always looked for a spark of anger, a hint of the old Tina he could negotiate with, but all he found was the calm, vast ocean of my indifference. "She's getting so tall," Ronald said, handing me the backpack. "She has her grandfather's height," I replied, my voice steady. "Tina, I saw the news about the new wing you're building at the hospital." He hesitated, his fingers lingering on the strap of the bag. "It's incredible what you've done. I think about that night at the club a lot. I think about what I said to you in the apartment." "I don't," I said. It wasn't a lie. I didn't think about his cruelty anymore, because his cruelty had been the wind that pushed me toward my own strength. "My father told me to trust the plan, Ronald. I finally understand what he meant. He didn't want the money to change me. He wanted the loss of it to change you. He wanted to make sure that the only people left in my life were the ones who saw my worth when I had nothing." Ronald looked at the school, at the bronze statue of the janitor leaning on a mop, and then back at me. "I was a fool," he whispered. "No," I said, a small, restorative smile touching my lips. "You were just the man who helped me realize that a Patson doesn't need a king to own a kingdom." I turned away and walked toward the school. I felt the sun on my face and the steel in my spine. I thought of my father in his blue coveralls, mopping the floors of this very building, a secret billionaire who found more joy in a peanut butter sandwich with his daughter than in a vault full of gold. He had taught me the greatest lesson of all, that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's the legacy of love you leave behind, and the strength to stand tall when everyone else expects you to fall. Sound. The sound of Naomi's laughter echoing. The music swells into a grand, sweeping, and peaceful finale. I am Tina Thompson Patson. I am never alone. I am never poor. I am never powerless. And as the school doors opened to welcome a new generation, I knew that somewhere, in a lighthouse made of stars, my daddy was watching, and he was finally, perfectly, at peace. Tina's story reminds us that the people who walk away from us aren't taking our value with them. They're just making room for the life we were always meant to lead. Ronald lost a fortune, but Tina found her soul. If this story of the janitor's secret and the echo in the garage moved you, please share it. Let it be a lighthouse for someone else standing in the rain tonight. Tell us in the comments, what is the most important lesson a parent or loved one ever taught you? Let's honor their memory together. Subscribe to Elena's Love Lounge for more stories of rebirth, justice, and the unstoppable power of the human heart. Remember, you are a treasure, whether the world sees it or not. Health, peace, and true love to you all. Good night.